You're listening to Chaos Public Radio.
Hello, and welcome to the Gender Nonconformity Chat, casual conversations about breaking the binary. I am Mary Jane Blank, and today my guest is Vivian Wulf, a Twitch streamer. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well, thank you very much, Mary.
I usually go by Jane or Mary Jane.
Okay, Mary Jane.
Yeah.
Okay.
Let's just start with the most general question here. How do you conceive of sex and gender? Because I argue that it's a very personal concept, and thus everyone should probably have a different answer, and it's a hard one. It was not easy for me to answer.
Sure. I don't know if God, for a basic question, it's an incredibly hard and all-encompassing one. I would say, that people are born with partially innate characteristics, I would say. I mean, the evidence seems to show that children sort of know their gender by the time they're 4 years old at most. Some studies put it as the earliest possible being somewhere around 18 months, which is, so I think that there's got to be some degree of innate sense of gender there. We also see gender in chimpanzees, for example, chimps taking on different social roles, or social roles that are generally taken up by the other gender. So I think that there's got to be some innate part. But the larger sort of area of just like, what clothes you wear, how you look, all this sort of stuff, I think definitely comes from sort of like the social categorization, which is obviously linked to sex, because it comes from our perceptions of the jobs of men and women in society, but necessarily over time those jobs have changed, and they're not necessarily the same as they used to be.
Absolutely,
and I don't think our language has kind of caught up with that yet. Yeah, I mean, I would argue that those jobs should never have been, that regimented either. But, we can't hold, like, medieval society to the same sort of standards that we have.
Yeah, no,
especially medieval.
Yeah, like, the science of medicine is barely a century old by our standards. So, yeah, I get it.
Yeah, I mean, how long ago was it they got rid of the 4 humours? It was literally like about a century and a half ago that they got rid of black bile, yellow bile.
2,000 years it took them.
Yeah.
Stupid Hippocrates ruined it for everybody. Anyway. But I agree with you completely that, like, the social aspect for me too is a big part of what gender means to me, because a lot of it for me is about how I'm being perceived at any time, and I agree with that too. That it is like I agree with you about the innate nature. The evidence obviously is on our side. Other mammals do this, and then when you get beyond mammals, gender is just like totally out the window and comes out in all these different ways. And yeah, I'll ask then the obvious question, and I'm gonna ask it. I'm gonna ask this the way I wrote it here. So
Okay.
I'm gonna do it backwards. So when did you start outwardly confirming your identity?
Outwardly confirming. I mean, I suppose that's just you asking, like, what is my sort of like gender journey, if you like.
Yeah, basically, yeah.
Okay, so yeah, so when I was much younger, I experimented with a lot of things, clothing and so on. I eventually ended up like in the goth subculture because I could wear whatever the hell I wanted there, like
Classically androgynous
even
subculture.
like man skirts, right? Like man skirts, lots of makeup, all that sort of stuff, and it was just a really accepting community of people who were like largely non-conformative, right, in all kinds of ways, not necessarily just gender, but obviously gender was kind of included in that. And I think it was sort of when I was about 18, 19 that I one of my gay friends took me to this bar, and there were all these trans women there, and it just kind of like fucking clicked in my head that like, oh shit, I can kind of do this actually, like that's a thing that I can do. Because my childhood was super fucking rocky. Like I grew up in a children's home and all that sort of stuff. So there was I didn't really have much time to like sort of like learn about gender or anything else. And so I mean, going to the goth club for the first time, just seeing two guys sitting on the bench like kissing each other blew my fucking mind. Right,
Right.
that they could do this without being harassed and bullied, and you know, or even that this was like considered acceptable in any form in a society. So you know, it took a couple of years after that for me to discover that trans people exist, and
Right.
that you know, and like I say, it was like a fucking light went off my head, and I told my girlfriend at the time, like we went home, like literally, I think the second time we went to that bar, um, you know, the first time I was like, I went there, I was like thinking all these things, I was like, holy shit, like, and then the second time I came back and I told my girlfriend, I was like, you know what, I think I might be one of those people, and you know, she was cool with it to start with, but like, you know, stuff kind of fell apart after that.
Yeah.
Much of muchness, really. It was sort of puppy love anyway. Um, and yeah, and so that was the first time that I started to transition
Sure.
male to female, as it were. And I got most of the way, and I started on hormones. I was living as a woman for about a year and a half before my life just went completely fucking tits up again.
Whew.
And I sort of I went semi back in the closet. You know, I ended up homeless again, which was really bad. And I went sort of semi back in the closet. Not really back in the closet. I was still kind of, you know, I was still like visibly kind of queer, I guess, but like I was no longer like attempting that full transition.
Mm-hmm.
And I slowly shifted back to being more and more masculine,
Damn.
until yeah, until I would refer to myself as like genderqueer, which you know is the term that that was used around that time for like non-binary people. Non-binary
Absolutely.
wasn't really a term that was particularly popular at the time.
Absolutely.
Um,
No, same for me. The first trans people I met
and
were all genderqueers
yeah,
as well. Because it was like 2011,
yeah,
2010,
oh,
yeah.
cool. The first trans people I met were all binary trans women, and so like again it was that thing of like I was like, oh shit, is this me? This feels like me, you know. And I went on this sort of like transition journey, and I had no concept of like non-binary stuff either, you know. Like being outside of the binary was also a concept that was completely alien to me, and it took me a little while before I sort of discovered the term genderqueer and started referring to myself in that way. Um,
For sure.
but yeah, I sort of gradually ended up masculinizing a little bit, and then yeah, and I sort of I married this like weird double life, I suppose, for a few years of you know, sometimes being very femme, and a lot
Right.
of the time being very masculine. And I would do this in different companies. So I would go out to like uh, you know, I was pretty big in the BDSM and fetish community, and I would be femme in that community because I felt like it was fine and it was accepted and it was, you know,
Mm-hmm.
and I could just like be myself. And then, you know, in regular normie society, I was just, you know, I was masculine. But at that point, like everybody knew me as Vivian or
Uh-huh.
V or some variant of. So it wasn't like I had to like change names, and I didn't have this odd, almost like uh multiple personality thing that some trans people have, where they're like, oh, I went out as April the other night, you know.
Sure.
And I'm sort of like, that never really made much sense to me.
Yeah.
It always seemed like you're going out as you, right? You're just like wearing different clothes and
Yeah.
stuff.
No,
But
I really relate to that for myself too, because oddly enough, like we started in different places, like in our lives, but have so many of the same experiences. I also went off hormones for like a year and was starting to masculinize, and like so people started misgendering me, and that had a lot of effects. But a few years earlier, before I started taking hormones, I worked at a credit union where I presented as masculine, and so the way I it worked for me that it rationalized it was ultimately it was like this is a drag king show. I am the office drag king, you know? It's like I'm playing a role. Like it's me,
yeah,
but filtered through the perception of being a businessman. So I'm not doing anything differently. But just because of how I look, that's how people will perceive me, and so that's kind of how it worked, doing that for me too. Yeah, I get it, and it's funny too. So, you mentioned like the goth communities and BDSM communities. So, do you feel like these sort of places, like extreme community like that, like maybe like even online leftism and things like that, do you think like those places, they give you that kind of freedom? That's why there end up being more trans people, because like when you start questioning these sort of things, like
Well,
it starts opening conceptual
yeah.
spaces.
I think it's just, everybody sort of like looks for a place that they can belong in society, and in regular cis-normative society, it's difficult for trans people to find that place.
Hmm.
Um, and especially a place where you feel like you can just be you, and nobody's gonna like harass you for it, or like come up and ask you loads of fucking intrusive
Yeah,
questions, or
make a big deal about it.
whatever, right? Like, even the most well-meaning people, like, sometimes it's just like, hey, like, maybe just let me fucking drink my drink, like, or eat my lunch, or whatever the fuck I'm doing. Like, I don't need to have this conversation about gender every minute of every fucking day. Like, it's just, and you can go into those other spaces and you can just be you, and people are
Yeah,
just like, yeah, no, that's Viv, she's cool. And and there's no questioning, or anything, which is really nice. So I think that, yeah, definitely these communities that are more open and accepting of trans people are going to attract more trans people, because if they find them,
yeah,
they're going to find a place where they're like, oh shit, actually I can relax among these people.
absolutely,
And
absolutely.
that's a really important thing that I think a lot of cis people don't really understand, because they get that sort of sense in regular in cis normative society. They can just be themselves, and nobody's going up to them going, hey,
Absolutely.
why do you grow your beard like that?
Right.
You're growing a beard? That's crazy.
Have you gotten
Like,
the
nobody does that.
surgery? And they're like, what surgery? You know?
I love surgery.
Like,
Yeah.
oh yeah, yeah, I got my wisdom
Are
teeth
you planning
removed.
on having surgery? Yeah, yeah. Are you planning on having the surgery? That's one of those,
No,
isn't it? It's
exactly. The
just
fact
like,
that
well,
the surgery can even be like, both of us know what someone means by that, but a cis person, you went up to say that, you know, the fuck would it mean to them?
yeah, yeah, exactly. Um, yeah, yeah. So naturally, these spaces are going to be more full of them.
Yeah. Well, and
But
and so an interesting thing about your
yeah.
story that again is similar to mine and similar to other like trans people I've met who then came out as trans by meeting me, like just how important it is that just meeting trans people is what allows us, like, so for me a big blocking point was being presented that like sort of sex and gender was one concept and immutable, and so I just believed it was not
Mhm.
possible for most of my growing up life. And like when I was a teenager, it was so funny looking back to being a teenager, because I would say things like I want to be a woman, but because I didn't believe it was possible, I was just like, oh, this is probably what everyone thinks, all boys probably all hate their penises. And I found out, no, no, no.
Right? Yeah.
Turns out,
Exactly. Yeah. You just think, you just like, oh shit, life would be so much better and so much easier, and I'd feel so much better about myself if I was just or feminine,
yeah,
and everybody probably thinks this, right? Like, it's like I imagine every man thinks this, but
right, no,
no,
I know.
I guess that's not the case.
I don't think so. I don't
Yeah.
assume so.
And it takes you discovering that there are other people out there actually living that reality for you to realize that it's possible, and also that actually it is a thing that is separate from the usual human experience, that maybe you should take some action around if you want to be more comfortable. Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, and obviously that's a big part of this too, sort of trying to demystify non-binary identity throughout it too, because obviously it's complicated and
Mm,
there's like I said, every person has a different sort of gender expression. Um but anyway,
yeah.
this is interesting sort of segue. So for another thing for me in high school that was part of that effect was that I've always been attracted to people who are bisexual or identify in or as pan for that reason, not like they wouldn't care about my
Mm,
my genitals, which I know is a weird way to think about it a lot, but that's how it worked for me. So like,
mm.
that's my question for you. Like, how do you think about your sexuality, or do you?
So I mean, obviously getting involved with sort of the fetish community very young, I very quickly lost a lot of my hang-ups. There's stuff that I've seen the stuff that I've seen done in fetish clubs that absolutely does not interest me, but that the average person would just be like, whoa, holy crap, but I'm just like, whatever, right?
Yeah.
And yeah, yeah. I mean, I don't know how PC this podcast is, so I don't, sorry, PG rather is what I mean.
Oh no.
I don't want to describe anything in great detail, but
Sure.
like,
Yeah, this is
yeah,
the
you
early
see some
days, so it
pretty
doesn't really
extreme
matter
things,
yet.
and um, yeah, yeah. Anyway, yeah, so you see some pretty extreme things and stuff, and a lot of my sort of like sexual hang-ups like just went, bodies are bodies.
Yeah.
I've seen more penises and vaginas by the time that I was 21 than most people see in their entire lives.
Right.
So it sort of removed that sort of level of embarrassment or shyness around sex that I used to have. Um,
That's great.
and I I had a boyfriend when I was very young. When I was sort of about 14 at the children's home, there was a guy. I also had a girlfriend, sort of, at that children's home. I engaged in sexual activity with people of both sexes, and I sort of knew that other people thought that this was weird, and I had this thing for a while where I was like, am I gay? I might be gay because again, the idea of being bisexual, like it was,
Yeah.
thinking outside of the binary was very difficult for me given the
Same.
environment that I grew up in. Um, and um, but yeah, but I think like those later experiences with the goth community, with the BDSM community and stuff, sort of like removed all those hang-ups for me, and I got to a point where I was just like, like I find like there are some people that I think are sexy, and there are some people that I'm not attracted to. And generally that's like really masculine people, like super super masculine. It's rare for me to be attracted to them, although every now and again there's like this big cuddly hairy guy with a beard who I'd just really like to roll up on his chest. That'd be really nice. Like, but
I
like the
get you.
muscly dudes, like never been a thing that I've been into. And and generally I'm sort of attracted to people who are also sort of a bit odd, either like gender wise or fashion wise, or
Yeah.
like yeah, just
Some kind of like
generally people who are
outsider
a
a
bit
little
odd
bit.
because I find them yeah, because I find them interesting, and I suppose the first step to like making me want to like get down with somebody is making me interested in them, like,
Right, of
you know.
course.
Uh, yeah.
Absolutely.
And
No,
uh, and
that's
and other than that, I mean, I suppose I would probably say I'm pansexual, because gender, although it is a factor in some ways, it generally isn't. It's more
yes.
about the person. Like a tomboyish girl can be attractive to me, a very feminine girl can be attractive to me, a very like I said, a Barry
Mm-hmm.
daddy guy can be really attractive to me, like,
Right. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Like
and each of them are sort of attractive in their own way as well.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's how I kind of feel about it myself too, where I have like separate sexual attractions and romantic attractions. So yeah, like I can appreciate the that beauty of anybody, and like again, I agree with you completely that like the way we describe sexuality is totally useless like based on gender because like it's no like it really doesn't apply to almost anybody. It's like nobody's attracted to everyone of another gender or their own gender or whatever. It's all based on aesthetics and interests, things like that. I identified as pansexual for a long time for that same reason. That gender, it just didn't matter so much. Like you say, like someone who, especially
Yeah.
meeting a lot of trans people who are not out yet or are just transitioning to, where you meet somebody and perceive them one way and then they're like, well, actually I'm really a future masculine, really masculine guy, I'm just short. Like that was someone I dated who
Yeah. Yeah.
came out as trans by meeting me. It was like totally a different relationship than I thought I was getting into because of that, because it was like, oh, a trans person taking hormones, I can do that you know
Yeah.
Anyway, yeah, sorry, I didn't have write a lot of. I wrote just this. I pretty much hit all the general topics I wanted to. Just sort of free form conversation stuff. Like I said, this is the first time I'm doing this. um,
That's all right. Like,
yeah. Uh, yeah, and I'm also glad. It's really fascinating. Again, like, being from other different parts of the world, completely different experiences, like class wise, and
mm,
yet so many of the same experiences in adulthood. It's so wild.
yeah.
Um,
I,
it's
I, I suppose if you wanna. Sorry, no, go ahead.
Go ahead. No, no, go right ahead.
Uh, I suppose if you wanna add anything, I could tell you that gender is, for me at least, still a thing that I struggle with to a certain degree. I'm still looking, being I'm pretty comfortable with the idea that I am genderqueer. I am non-binary in some fashion, and I generally refer to myself as like femme genderqueer or femme non-binary, which some people would also refer to as like demigirl or something like that.
Yeah.
Um, but I still sort of wrestle with it because there are no really sort of like clear defined terms and lines. If you're not part of that binary, if you don't feel comfortable in that binary, it really is an infinite line with
Yes.
infinite dots that you could put a dot anywhere on that line.
Yeah.
Um, so I sort of just generally approximate the position in which I feel comfortable, and I just do the things that I want to do. I present the way that I want to present. I'm, I was back on hormones for a while, and I'm gonna be back on hormones again soon, hopefully legally this time, which
Oh,
would be
that would
really
be great.
nice, like with proper support and stuff.
Oh, geez. Yeah.
Um,
Fingers
and
crossed.
yeah, and I do experience a lot of dysphoria around my body, which is why I want to take those hormones and stuff. Um, but I'm still, I've never been 100% comfortable with the idea of the surgery,
Sure.
or and I've always been worried about locking myself into a locking myself into a role and not being able to express myself as I want to express myself, but feeling that in order to be accepted as a member of that role, I must behave or look or speak or whatever in a certain way,
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's been a long journey to realizing that actually you can do what you want. You can be who you want. You can express yourself in any way that you want. Um, and that locking yourself into those roles, if you don't feel completely comfortable with them, is probably, not the optimum path to feeling comfortable with yourself.
Absolutely. No,
Yeah.
yeah, and it's really
But
funny, even deconstructing these coming from that perspective, deconstructing the binary, yeah, we still feel those like kind of those pressures and those forces and like you say like even without having a specific set of expectations put on us, it's almost like we kind of choose some of those expectations, but also yeah, like you just kind of do whatever you want. That's where I'm at too. Like, and how people perceive me is how they perceive me, which is how like in my for the last year for myself, being off of hormones, I like being misgendered was completely different than it was early in transition. Where early in transition, I was this ball of anxiety, still using men's restrooms, which was horrible because then I would just like lock myself in there and be like, oh, there's other people in here, I can't get out. um, and
I hate restrooms. I hate
yes,
public restrooms so much.
yes,
I
no,
just
yeah,
do. There, there's even, at my local gay bar, they have like gender neutral restroom, um, and like that's a lot more comfortable for me. But
mm-hmm,
even going in there, I'm just like, I if there's anybody else in there, I'm just like,
yeah, no,
like
yeah,
I
the
think like what do they think I'm in here for?
right.
And you hear all the stuff in the news, especially here in the United Kingdom, which we have a lot of problems with gender critical uh,
Yes, thank you.
feminists, right?
Thank you.
Yeah,
Yes. Yeah, thank you. Air quotes, big air quotes, feminists. Yeah.
yeah, big air quotes for the feminists. Yeah,
Yeah.
and and so you're inundated with this stuff like on a regular basis,
Yeah, it's worse
about,
than it is
the
even here
dangers
in the
trans
US.
people, yeah, the dangers of trans people being in restrooms with women and girls, which is the phrase that they like to use,
Right.
and I worry a lot about not not about, geez, just about how I'm perceived when I go into a bathroom. And it's like, if somebody notices that I'm queer, are they going to like react in a hostile manner, or are they going to think I'm there for some kind of perverted reason rather than to just, relieve myself?
Yeah, no, exactly. That's the
Yeah.
most absurd part, which is why I feel like it is like part of the trans experience is hating the public restroom for this reason. Because, like, it's just so much unnecessary consternation, you know? Like, I've had maybe two
Mm.
interactions in my entire life with another person in the bathroom, you know? Who was not like a stranger, you know? Uh, and
Yeah.
yeah, so yeah, for myself too, I prefer gender neutral bathrooms, like the single stall. I became like loving the single stall. Like there was even an app someone made that was like safe to pee, where it just like listed all the gender neutral and single stall restrooms in an area, which is really nice.
I have to say, I don't know how I feel about, gender neutral bathrooms, in all honesty. I think there's, so in queer spaces like gay bars and stuff, I don't think there's so much of a problem with them. In sort of more cis-normative spaces, I think also on university campuses they've been relatively okay. But
Yeah,
in more sort of adult cis-normative spaces, changing rooms and swimming pools was like a big one here in the UK,
yeah, same.
where they saw, a rise in sexual assaults against women, right, which sort of like validates the TERF's
Jeez,
concerns, and also it's a bad thing. We don't want a rise in sexual assaults, right? And all
absolutely.
those sexual assaults are like cis men against cis women, right? But it is true that, um, cis guys have a bit of a problem, not all of them, but disproportionately have a problem with being able to keep their hands to themselves, or
Right.
to share a space in which people sort of like disrobe, with women. Probably because society has sort of like taught
Yes.
them that it's all this taboo thing, and maybe
Yes.
if it was a thing that, if gender neutral bathrooms were completely normalized, maybe they wouldn't have these kinds of behaviors or reactions to those spaces. But I don't know if we can really afford, um,
Yeah.
for a lot of women to suffer and be hurt by, cis men who can't deal with being in private spaces with cis women.
Absolutely.
Um, so I do worry about the gender neutral bathrooms thing. As a non-binary person, gender neutral bathrooms are fucking ideal for me. I
Right.
would much rather not go into a binary bathroom, right? But,
Yeah.
um, I don't know what the solution is there. I don't know
I
what the
got you.
answer is there. I think, yeah.
Society isn't ready in a weird way, which is kind of
Yeah,
sadly
in
true.
a weird way.
No, I hear you
Yeah,
completely. I
and
actually,
that whole commentary is probably going to get me in a bit of trouble with the trans community. But it's just simple.
no,
it's not that trans women are a threat.
yeah,
It's that cis men are a threat, and
yeah,
occasionally cis women are a threat, and occasionally trans women are a threat, because it doesn't matter what gender you are,
yeah.
everybody's a fucking
Yeah,
asshole. But
ultimately
like,
entitlement
but
is the
like,
threat,
yeah.
and men are trained to be the most entitled, that entitled to everything, which is how reactionaries are now getting so much popular, right? Because they're just producing that as their whole,
Yeah.
there's dozens of YouTubers we could name, and we shouldn't, except for one, but because we were on his show, and so that's the only one worth mentioning. Amazing. Anyway, sorry, I wasn't supposed to do that, but I couldn't
Oh,
help myself.
fucking yeah.
I just love
Well,
that. My
I mean,
first
that goes
guest
into the other.
I have in common with Jesse Lee Peterson, of all people. It's amazing. Anyway.
Oh, geez.
Um,
Did you go on Jesse Lee
No,
Peterson?
no, 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 no. I found you by from watching him because I got into watching people
Oh,
he
I
interviewed for a
see.
while, and so that's how I heard about you, and that's how I
Uh,
got into, unfortunately, like Destiny for a little while, and David Packman went on there too that I thought was really interesting. But yeah,
I've had a lot of interactions with Destiny, and I know there's a lot of consternation about him in the trans community, and probably rightly so in some aspects, especially after his views on transports, for example.
Oh, sure.
I do think that there are worse people out there. I think that generally
Yes.
he's trying to do a good thing, and
Yeah.
occasionally he fucks up and has views that are, contrary to what I believe in, and have debated it, with him on
Right.
several occasions. It's not like I'm giving him a complete free pass here, but I think there's definitely worse people that we could be worried about. I don't think
Yeah.
that Destiny's particularly a threat to the trans
No.
community in any great fashion.
True. It's true.
But I don't have any major problems with them. Yeah, that transport thing. I was just like, holy shit! Like, I'm so sick of seeing this argument being
I know.
being used and
It's,
touted around, and it's so much worse, I think, for me as a Brit, and
mm,
probably for a lot of Americans as well, who are sort of inundated with because Fox News will run those
yes.
transport stories, but I feel like Fox News, people on the left realize that Fox News is bollocks, right?
Right. Yeah. No. It's the
But
most
here in the
efficient
UK,
propaganda
the
machine in the
people,
United States.
yeah, right. But if you're on the left,
Yeah.
it's twat, right?
Yeah.
It's
It's all
terrible.
lies mostly.
So,
Yes.
um, yeah. So, but here in the UK, you have the added problem of like TERFs, right? And so the people talking about the fair play for women, right? Fuck, what's the other fucking group? Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, it's generally the TERFs, which also, infect our government. They get spots on morning TV. They get to,
Yes.
on shows that are otherwise pretty liberal, and in
Right.
papers, like Guardian, where they'll get columns and stuff, in a paper that is ostensibly really, really quite far
Yeah.
left.
I was gonna say it's generally pretty
Not
progressive. Yeah.
not socialist, but they do
Yeah.
have socialist writers like Owen Jones, and so yeah, and so that kind of narrative infects our space as well. It's not just like a battle between the left and right. Like we have the left, and then we have this sort of bizarre, traditionalist, almost centrist left, quote unquote, feminists who are quite happy to pal around with like conservatives, and actually in some cases Nazis, like
Yeah.
fucking Jean-Francois Garry. And it's so fucking weird because a lot of the left kind of like accepts them because they use this feminist label.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, or
It's very
like
much become like this wedge issue.
yeah. No. Or like I'm sure this is similar in the UK as well as the US because like for here like a lot of the turfs came out of second wave feminism, and so like there's a lot of like basically like people who are in my mom's generation, for example, like second wave feminism was like a big deal and really changed their perceptions,
It,
and so
yeah,
easily you could see somebody who says all the right things about women and interaction with class and how women different perceptions on them, and then you have the transsexual empire
I
right
feel
next
like
to
a
it.
lot of them have yeah, I feel like a lot of them have like fallen away from that though.
Absolutely.
Uh, Julie Bindel still very much keeps to the second wave feminist credentials. But then you have people like Germaine Greer, for example, who writes a fucking column about, hey, stop moaning about marital rape, it's not all that bad.
Jesus,
Like,
yeah,
this is
fuck.
not a feminist fucking position,
No,
all right?
the
That's not even
opposite
a second
definition.
wave feminist
Absolutely.
position. Okay, like, and so I feel like a lot of them are sort of slipping away from that, and that's but they still have the label feminist, and they still have some of the
Yes.
notoriety, or rather they still have some of the admiration
Hmm.
because of how these women
We're
were
influential.
at the forefront of the second wave feminist movement. Exactly, right? So they're the champions of the second wave, and
Yeah.
now they're like, yeah, fuck trans people though. um,
Yeah, no, they were champions
and
against women in the workplace, and they're
you
like,
can
but
see
get
how
trans people out of the workplace.
people get confused, and well, not even confused, I guess, just they latch onto the anti-trans stuff because these people have been their guiding light for a while, and it's just like on this issue they're fucking dreadful.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
It's funny, interesting.
but third wave feminism all the fucking way.
Yeah, intersectional feminism. Yeah, third wave is even better. um, Yeah, actually,
Yeah,
third wave feminism has not been. It's not been transphobic as much as I've been a critic of third wave feminism, but it's not transphobic normally. Usually, it's more about the white feminism anyway. A totally different issue, um, for another time.
yeah. I think third wave feminism's issues are with not rooting their critiques in class analysis as well,
Yeah,
which is probably a more socialist way of looking at things. But I
yeah.
think
Well, yeah,
you have to
international.
recognize that.
Yeah, it's not international enough. It's not exactly. It's not worker focused enough. And yeah, uh, yeah, totally. But yeah, as two socialists talking about this, it makes sense to talk about it that way. So, for
Yeah,
sure.
yeah.
Well, no,
Uh,
it's interesting. So going back to what you said about the bathrooms, I actually completely agree. Even though I went to in college, I was in a all the dorms were co-ed. There was literally like one hall that was not, that was like single gender, and no one even was in the boys' hall. No one wanted to be in the boys' only hall. And the bathrooms were all integrated and stuff, and there was no issues there. But I still agree with you though, because when I conceive of a gender neutral restroom, I'm thinking of single stall restrooms, because those are the only ones that are gender neutral out in the world. But yeah, I hadn't thought about the repercussion, the possible like, it's not even repercussions of having those kind of gender neutral bathrooms, but like why that idea would be so hard to sell too, because like it's not even just that
hmm.
there are repercussions, but yeah, it's
Well,
like that conceptual space for sexual assault and things like that to happen, especially because of like the reality too about how most of these things happen between people who are couples, and if it's not weird for a couple to go into a bathroom, like, yeah, I could see it going a lot of bad ways, and that's why I also like the single stall restroom as well. I think that is just the best,
yeah.
you know, um, just more
But
accessible.
again, the another option would be to have men's, women's, and gender neutral bathrooms, but you can't expect every business to like put in three bathrooms. That's fucking most. A lot of shops, small cafes, or whatever don't have the room to put
No.
in three bathrooms. The same goes for like single stalls. I mean, like you can't expect like
Yeah.
a larger business or a mid-sized business to put in multiple single stalls either. So the bathroom issue is actually complicated and does warrant some discussion, but it needs
Yeah.
to be done without the sort of like alarmist rhetoric of trans women trying to like
Yes.
hurt cis women,
Yeah, this
which
century
is
old idea of the dangerous trans woman, um,
well, just the dangerous,
the sexual deviant
yeah,
trans
just the
woman.
dangerous. Absolutely, yeah, the sexual deviants, right? The gendered, sexual and relationship minority people, right?
Yeah,
If you're gay,
absolutely,
if you're
absolutely.
gay, you're trans, you're whatever. Then
Even
there's something
actually,
wrong with you. There's something a bit sick, something a bit perverted, and
yeah,
you could be a danger to people if you're in a space where you might be able to see their genitals. Oh no, you know.
right.
So I mean, it's the same sort of like rhetoric that we heard under Section 28 here with
What's Section 28?
Section 28 was a law in England, a bill passed in England under Margaret Thatcher, I believe,
Good old
that
Maggie.
that said that it was illegal to good old Maggie Thatcher milks Thatcher.
Thank you,
Um,
the
that's
Queen of
what we used
Austerity.
to. That's what we call her. Yeah,
Fair
yeah, because
enough.
she took away the children's. We used to when I was at school. We got milk at break time,
Hmm.
but Margaret Thatcher removed all that. She's like, no, can't afford for kids to have milk at break time, so they called her
Yeah,
Margaret Thatcher the milk snatcher. Um,
she's
but
anyway.
uh, but yeah, Section 28 was a law passed under that government that was very similar to Russia's anti-gay propaganda laws, in which it became illegal to teach. I suppose even that like gay people existed, but it became absolutely illegal to teach that it was okay to be gay, basically,
Right.
right? So they didn't teach about it, and hate crimes went up and all that sort of stuff. But there was a huge debate around it, and when you go back and you listen to some of the stuff that was said, it's very, very similar to the stuff that's being said about trans people today. The idea of like allowing gay teachers, for example, right?
Yes, I
Gay
remember that
teachers
too.
really
Yeah.
scary because they're going to be around children, and they might indoctrinate them into this
Right.
lifestyle.
Right. Which is just
Um,
code for
and
like,
you
we'll
just you
make it
hear
think
that.
they're normal.
Yeah,
You
and
know?
this is where you get like drag queens are not for kids, you know?
Right.
And very, very much the same sort of sentiment. You know, you can't have these people who don't fit in the gender binary, who flaunt things, who are like sexual deviants. You can't have them around children because they're trying to indoctrinate them into their lifestyle. They're
Yeah.
trying to make them like them. I mean, it's, you know,
The irony
and
is
you
so
hear it
funny.
like yeah, you hear it in the Nazi circles as well, to a much greater extent, where they start talking about how you know, how do gays reproduce? They can't, can they? So obviously, the only way they can reproduce is by like turning one of your children into one of them.
Oh my god.
Um, yeah, so
Uh,
but it's just a trope that's gone on for a very, very long time.
yeah.
At least since the sort of like 20s is some of the you know, the
Pretty much.
1920s. I can think
Basic.
of some stuff with the sterilization and so on,
Hmm.
when they were having the argument over sterilization in the United States.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, for sure. No, exactly. Like it as long as people have tried to understand that trans people exist, that is what has happened to us. That has been our experience. Is like, how do we legislate them? Um, and a century later, comparatively, not being sterilized by the government is some progress, I guess. But yeah,
It depends on what country you live in. I mean,
correct,
several countries still have that. You know,
correct. Right. There are some
if
countries.
they allow you to transition legally at all,
Right. Yeah.
some
No.
countries don't. Some
There are some
countries
countries you and I couldn't
have
step
the
foot
death
in.
penalty for being trans. Yeah.
Yeah.
And even among those countries where you can change your gender legally, you know, quite a few of them still have that restriction of being sterilized. Japan,
Right.
Iran is often lauded as being this like bastion of progressivism within Islamic theocracies, and honestly, it's really fucking like, I
Yeah.
mean, you know,
Progressive among
they issued
theocracies.
a they
Like,
issued
come
a
on.
fatwa saying that you could that it is possible for a woman to be born inside the body of a man, essentially, right? But
Hmm.
like, and the woman that did that, I forget her name, and I wish I could remember it, but she was so fucking brave. She got put into, you know, she was a trans woman. She got put into a psychiatric facility. She was tortured there. She was beaten. She was horribly fucking treated, and she left and went to the ruler's palace to like ask him to make the you know, make it okay for her to transition, essentially.
Holy
And
shit.
she, you know, she went and she, like tore off her shirt, which was, you know, so she could show that she'd grown breasts from the previous hormone treatment. While in the psychiatric institution, though, they injected her with testosterone to sort of like masculinize her, make her more of a man again. So like, not taking away from the braveness and the sacrifice that went into acquiring that particular right
Right.
for trans people to transition in Iran, but
Right.
like
But that's the point. Is like that's who to
the way
credit.
it's been implemented. Yeah, yeah. But the way it's been implemented now is just that, like, if you're a man and you want to have sex with another man, you can't do that. That's illegal. That's
Uh huh. Oh
they still
God.
have the death penalty for that, right?
Jeez.
So if you want to do that, you have to transition, which is fucking awful, as any trans person knows. If you're not trans, you don't want to fucking transition,
No,
right?
it
Because
sucks.
you're just gonna get the other stuff. So,
Yeah. No. Exactly.
uh,
That's why that I hate the term transgender for that reason because it's like it's like I obviously love myself and whatever I have to accept myself, but at the same time it's like yeah, like why would anyone choose like there's no benefits to being trans. There's only downsides. The upsides are accepting yourself and getting comfortable in your body and feeling generally like good, not basically not having dysphoria because for me too, I never recognized it as
yeah,
dysphoria for my whole life because it was just there. Until I was on hormones for like a year, I realized like, oh, I don't feel as bad as I used to, you know. So yeah, that's where a lot of these concepts get really vague and why it's so interesting to talk about. Yeah, just because it's complicated. Everyone's got
I
that.
hate I the transgender thing as well. Like
Yes.
I think the reason that a lot of people think that comes up is because they believe that it's cool to be trans among the kids these days, and
Right.
I'm not a kid anymore.
Me too.
I'm 31 years old.
Oh shit,
so
we're the same age. Damn. Okay.
There you go. There you go. So I'm probably not 100% in tune with what's going on with the kids.
Yeah, but it's what they were saying in 2012,
Yeah, they were saying that in 2012, and that definitely wasn't the case then. But it might be more the case now that like people are more cool and accepting of trans people, among younger social groups. And if that's the case, then fucking great, in my opinion. But I think the idea that it's people are being trans because it's cool to be trans. I think even if you got some more social acceptance from that, right? The other effects of going through transition would, dysphoria is a really fucking horrible thing to go through. And, if you're developing the secondary sex characteristics of a gender that you don't identify with, it's going to be a really nasty fucking experience.
Yes.
And I don't think that anybody's going to willingly put themselves through that for for a little bit more social capital,
Yeah, no, it's like you say, like, the only reason is it's in countries, like you said, actually, like, I don't think Iran's the only example of that, where it's illegal to be gay, but it's not illegal to be trans, or being gay is more restricted and regulated, where being trans isn't. Like, that's the only place where it makes sense for someone who might not otherwise transition to do so. Like, but in the United States, where I am, it doesn't, like, there's no social capital to gain by being trans. Every trans woman who has like gotten popular in public has gotten torn apart in certain ways. When I hate to even mention Caitlyn Jenner, just because like she's just like hyper conservative older trans woman who like is a bad example of a trans.
I remember when she transitioned, and I'm down at the pub and I'm speaking to a couple of my trans friends, and it's like somebody will bring up Caitlyn Jenner, and it's just like, oh God, no, because everybody sort of like thought that she spoke for us at that point. She was the trans representative, and it's just like, God, no, I don't want this awful fucking person speaking for us. Not at all.
Yeah, terrible, just transitioned, hyper conservative her whole life, like, oh God. But my point being, like, even her, an older, very famous, popular, rich person, had a trouble, like, she was torn apart. Like, I heard about it first, obviously, with tabloid headlines misgendering her, for a long time. And like, when you already have that capital and it takes you down a little bit, like, it's not beneficial for most of us.
I think the one thing we can thank her for, I suppose, is just being out and being trans in the public eye, because at the moment I feel like very much we're still seen as a bit of a freak show, right?
Yeah.
Like an entertainment for the masses. The whole like for example, trans men only really get seen in the media when they get pregnant,
Yeah, they only do.
And it's like, hey, the pregnant man, like come and check out the freak show, and I feel like trans women, they get very similar treatment, in which they, it's all about their transness and less about their accomplishments. It's all about come and look at the freak rather than, and that must be a horrible thing to experience. So I have enormous gratitude even to Caitlyn Jenner, who is like by and large a horrible fucking human being, but doing a really great thing by being out and trans in the public eye.
Proving that even this conservative athlete in her 60s can transition and be a trans person. Someone who you would assume would be the opposite of all that becomes this hyper feminine woman. It is kind of gratifying in that normalizing way. Yeah.
But I think the more we have those people just living their lives and being trans, the less of a freak show they become, right?
Yeah.
Just normalizing trans people in the public eye. The more of us there are out there just being ourselves and doing our thing, the less of a less of a freak show it is, right? It just becomes a normal thing.
Just demystified. We need our trans Will and Grace. We need like a nightly sitcom with a trans man and a trans woman to normalize, just like doing normal things,
I mean, maybe, although Will and Grace definitely had a lot of fucking problems in the way that it just portrayed gay people in general, and like played into a lot of stereotypes and all that sort of stuff.
No, it's true. It only sounds more appealing for trans people because the stereotypes around us are all about tragedy. you know, usually.
Yeah.
So that's the only reason it, like, because you're right, it really was. It was basically just like, okay, yeah, we'll give you this, like, kind of Harvey Firestein's career, if you're familiar with him, like, where his characters were all these stereotypical gay men, but he's like, but at least a gay man's in the movie, you know? And I'm like, well, shit, I can't argue with that. And it's the same kind of idea where it's like, yeah, that's how I felt about it, but yeah, looking back, it's like, maybe we don't need to dwell on it, right? But just something like that, just something
I think
like...
we're getting more... I think we're getting more trans representation in media now that is better, right? That it's not always about the tragedy, where it's just trans people who happen to be trans who are just doing another thing, and it's not all about their transness, you know? Whereas Will and Grace was all about the gayness.
Yeah.
Like, I
where
feel
gayness
like
is the punchline of every joke, right?
We can, yeah, exactly. And I think we can just have, because trans people present in so many different ways, to like try and make it all about the transness would be to perpetuate a stereotype that just doesn't exist in reality. So it's much better to just have people who happen to be trans doing normal shit, you know?
Absolutely. No, absolutely. That's exactly right. Like, as a writer myself, like, that's what my goal in a lot of things is, as well, is just like, just putting trans people into things, like, both for trans actors, but also just for that, just representation, just like, you know, a trans man can be a cop, or whatever. That's a funny example for me to bring up as a, you know, but whatever.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of shows recently that have done something like that, and I can't think of any off the top of my head. I know they've existed.
Yeah.
There was a sci-fi on Netflix not so long ago where there was like a dubiously gendered person who and there was oh god.
Yeah, and then there was Orange Is the New Black with Glitter and Cox a while back. Yeah.
But and again, they made a lot of her story was very much about her transness, right? Which is something that I think, and it was about the tragedy of her transness, you know?
Yeah.
And I think that that's something that we should sort of, I mean, it's absolutely, there are a lot of commonalities in trans experience, and sometimes and you know, trans people do have like difficulties in common, but not all trans people have these difficulties.
Yes.
And I think it's important to tell other stories.
Yes.
The public knows this story.
Yes.
Somebody's born in the wrong body, they wrestle with it for a while, they come out and they lose all their friends and their family, and everything goes horribly wrong. Yeah, right. And so the public have heard this fucking story a million fucking times. We don't need to, I don't think we need to tell it again, although it's an important story to tell, to give, to induce empathy for the trans situation and show how like society's non-acceptance of trans people can be really hurtful. I think it's also important, like, just to tell other fucking stories, because I'm bored of that story. I don't want that to be the only fucking story I hear when I see a trans person on screen. I want other stories.
Yeah, no, that's the crazy thing that's so interesting, that's so cool about the trans experience in a way, is that like a trans woman who goes through that, you know, that same story is just as valid as a non-binary person who does none of it, even though their experiences diverge radically after a certain point, you know?
Yeah, I suppose. Depends on what kind of non-binary person you are.
No. But my point being is that it's such a grand, like it's the kind of thing where, you could make a show with 10 trans people with 10 different trans experiences, and someone would still be like, you know, you're leaving out XYZ people, and it's like, of course. Like, because that's just the nature of it.
The spectrum is so huge. I mean, it's you know, it's cool for people to get their own personal stories across, but I think that just stories that don't have to do with the character's transness, just them happening to be trans and then doing shit, I feel that this is a lot more helpful, really.
Absolutely.
In the end.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, we've been talking for about an hour, and I have to go, but it was a lovely conversation. Thank you so much for talking to me.
No worries. I'm Mix Vivian Wulf on YouTube, Twitch, and Twitter. And if you'd like to follow me on any one of those platforms, I'd love to have you. If you want to speak to me directly, my DMs are open on Twitter at the moment. They may close sometime in the future, but you can also follow me on Twitch and swing by my chat whenever I'm streaming and shout at me from the chat, and I'll see if I can answer any questions or I'm generally pretty open to conversations. So
absolutely,
just drop me a line if you want to chat.
Yeah, I recommend doing
All
all
right,
of those
thank you
things.
once
Definitely
again
follow her. Definitely
for listening to
go to their Twitch.
Non-Conforming Chat on Chaos Public Radio. I am Mary Jane Blank. Please consider supporting the show at ko-fi.com/Chaos Public Radio or patreon.com as well. Follow us on Twitter for new updates at Chaos Radio Cast. And our wonderful logo was made by Lily, aka Mothcub. Go support her. Patreon.com/Mothcub, Ko-fi.com/Mothcub. Go to her YouTube channel, Twitter /CubMoth, and Cargo Collective /Lily. Once again, if you are gender non-conforming yourself, if you're under the trans umbrella, or if you're non-binary or agender, or a butch woman or a femme man, and you would like to be interviewed on the show, or just have a casual conversation on the show, email me at chaospublicradio@gmail.com. Thank you so much, and I hope you will return later.